This is Market Ready, a brand new podcast about how companies bring products to market. On this season, we go behind the scenes and give you an in-depth look at the world of product marketing and answer questions like,
what is product marketing?
What are the core skills you need to be a product marketer?
How is product marketing different at large and small companies?
And so much more. But before we dive in,
on this episode, we're going to discuss how to work with other marketers. It's often overlooked how product marketing fits into the broader marketing team. And unfortunately, most people think marketing is a one-size-fits-all function. And today, we're busting that myth. We discuss how important it is for you to think about your launch in the context of the overall brand and be aware of how many communication touchpoints your customers are receiving. I cannot wait for you to tune in and learn more. And now, on to our show. So, just to recap, we have spent a lot of time this season talking about how do you actually go to market, who are some of your key stakeholders, yes. How do you think about learning the market? And so we really wanted to end this season with how do you actually work with other marketers? What do you think is important when you're working with other marketers?
I think as a part of this, we've talked about this thing throughout our podcast and just what makes a good product marketing manager. And I think what's good in terms of working with other marketers is that collaboration piece.
Yep.
And also understanding how your role fits in with other marketers. So as a product marketer, you create that go-to-market plan and you have to execute on it. But oftentimes, you're not going to be the person running that email campaign. You're not going to be the person running the brand campaign that's associated with it. Yep. So you have to essentially, and in some companies, negotiate for time for other marketers to help you execute. But two, you also have to convince them that your particular product launch is actually worth their time and effort as compared to other projects that they may be juggling. And so you really have to bring them along as your thought partners in this as well, because they are going to essentially you're passing off your go-to-market plan to them.
Yeah.
They're executing behind the scenes on setting that up for you. And then they're responsible for bringing you back the results. And you guys have to consult together about, okay, based on these results, what are the next steps that we have to do? And we can get into like what specific marketers there are because
I think we should start there.
Yeah,
I think that's really important. And just because, we want to cater to people who are really just learning the space and maybe wanting to enter the space. So in case you're not a marketer now, and every company does this differently, let's actually talk about how marketing teams are often structured so that people know what marketers would you be working with. So I would say, for example, at my company, we think about brand and content. Usually together. So I would say you might have a brand marketer, you might have a content marketer.
Yes.
We often have a demand gen or campaigns person. That still could be different from your social media people.
Yes.
And that would also be different from your creative team, and creative could roll into marketing, and creative could be their own department.
That's correct.
So am I missing anyone?
I would say probably the other folks that I would just add on there are your email marketers. So whoever they're considered, sometimes they're considered customer marketers as well. There's also your market research team.
Yeah. That's great if you have one.
Also a market research team that you may be working with. Marketing analytics team too.
Yep.
And then the only other one I would say is just along with demand gen is just like your digital media team. So they can fit under demand gen, or there's other folks that are on there too. These may be the folks who run your ad campaigns either on your particular channel. So anything that's company owned that your company organizes, or any other ad channels that may be outside of your company.
Yeah, I think that's a good interview, and I think we should take them one by one.
Yes.
So how do you typically work with brand?
This is a good one. So I've seen it work different places. At my current organization, our brand team, we actually have this model called, I believe we're calling them tripods or
Interesting.
triangles. Essentially, it's a product marketer, a brand marketer, and a customer marketer working together in order to launch a particular product. Now, this is something that I haven't actually seen at other companies that purposely put these three groups together.
It sounds like such a good idea, though.
Yeah. Typically, these would be the product marketer would be leading a launch, then would pull in the customer marketer or the brand person at key points, and then launch from there. Whereas this one, it's a triad of where these folks are working together from the very beginning to plan out things and understand, like, align on goals, align on who's our audience, align on messaging up front instead of it being an afterthought in some places.
Yeah, I would say strategically what I like about this is, as somebody who's currently overseeing brand, and I don't have as much visibility in what some of the product marketers in our business units are doing.
Right.
And we are coming out at times with like conflicting launches and stuff like that. It is really important for me that there is a two-way kind of connection between the brand and the product, right? Because as you evolve your product set, that might actually change your brand story.
Yes.
And if you have a certain brand in market, you want to make sure as product launches come out, they are on message, or they're bolstering the brand, or they're strategically evolving the brand.
Yes.
So I think it's really interesting. And I think it's really important that the two work closely together. And I think because we are in a little bit of a new stage where we're growing, and I think brand is kind of separate right now from some of what the products are doing in the BUs, and we're restructuring. I don't think we're working closely together. And I really see the challenge. I'm trying to tell a story, and you're releasing a new product, which actually kind of fundamentally changes the story that I'm trying to tell. And so that we actually do need to be closer aligned, and we're working on ways that we realign. But the second piece of what you said of being with a customer marketer, right? Like, that is the next piece. Once you have the story and you know how it's going to work, how that gets relayed to the customer, I think is a very, very important piece. And with those all usually working probably in succession instead of collaborating together, I could see that being really efficient. And I might even play next time I build a new team with playing with that triangle.
Learnings. This is all about shared learnings across the board.
It's so interesting, right? Because this is like about us giving back but to still be like, oh, this is a really interesting model. Yes. I am super excited about that because the customer should be central to everything that you're doing, and not an afterthought for the communication, which I think is important.
Which is true, because oftentimes I think when you're working with other marketers, when we have carved out, like, I do brand, I do product, I do content, and you're trying to pull it all together, to your point, like, they're doing brand over here, but I'm releasing a new product launch.
Right.
The part that we don't always bring in is that customers don't know that you work on brand, I'm working on a new product feature, or sometimes you'll even see this with product marketers who, where they're working on different features or a different product, but they're part of the same company. Yes. So customers don't understand or get that you're a product marketer for search, I'm a product marketer for outside search, and I just want to understand how these products are going to work together.
And
I see this
you
as
are
one
not
company.
My only vendor.
Yes.
And I feel like if I can pass something along to any kind of future product marketer, it's like, we think about our business and how we are structured in different silos, and it's important for you to own that domain. But when you start talking to the customer, you are not their only vendor. Yeah. So you can't have a million touch points just for your company because they're working across 10 of you or 20 of you. If they had those same frequency of touch points across all their vendors, it becomes a really poor experience. Right. So that's why I am really excited about this kind of triad that you're talking about, because I think it could solve a lot of inherent issues. I would say I want to make sure before we kind of move off a brand that we give more of a crystallized example. Yes. So I would say maybe if you are a software company, and I'll just bring our conversation from offline online, right? If you're a software company and you're releasing a product that's fundamentally putting you in a new place, maybe it has data, maybe it has hardware, that may even change your like elevator pitch about what the company does, right? It could start making that story more complicated or more nuanced. And, I'll just give an extreme example, like GE, for instance, which is like in a ton of different industries, from like content to, defense, right? Like it's really hard to talk about, what they do. And I feel like I looked up their pitch a while ago. I feel like it was like, building innovation or building for the future, right? Like it's really broad for something that can encompass all of these things, because you don't want to have a pitch that's really niche or really pigeonholed. And then you have to figure out how you work your way out of it as you start to expand your product set. So I just wanted to make it clear, like it may not seem really intuitive about why product releases might impact brand, but I think as you're trying to tell a cohesive story about your company and what they do and how they should work and how people should think about you, because it's really important if they think you just do one thing. If they think you're a tire company, right? And they want to buy a car, they're not going to go to you. Like when they think, oh, when I ding a tire, when I need to, my tires rotated, I'll come to you. But if you're saying I'm expanding to more than just tires and I have these other pieces, you want to be that top of mind as when people are starting to consider what vendors they're going to pick.
And your product launches should serve in tandem to that as well, like that overall brand story that you're trying to tell. So even if you are expanding into a new area, we'll just use the tire example, and now trying to get into car selling, how are you telling that story? How are you progressing? And how does that product launch into, now selling cars relate to your brand overall? And you'll see a lot of companies also start to think about rebranding too. So as you start to expand based on products that you have launched or features that are coming out, how do we make sure that we do incorporate this into our brand and the growth of that over time? So you can kind of see how both being a product marketer and being a brand marketer have an effect on one another.
And it's so interesting, especially when you say that, because something that's top of mind is I'm just sticking close to my industry is like MailChimp came out with a campaign about being more than just mail. But MailChimp is still in the name, right? And so this is a very clear kind of example of working with product and brand together, where you say the brand was MailChimp and it's very explicit about what they do, but now their product and their feature set are expanding past more than just email. And so how are you going to create that campaign to start to bridge the two together? So let's use that as a segue. Working with, I'm typically B2B, so we often call them demand generation. It could be campaigns. What are other people that kind of would bridge these two and be in that campaign world? What marketing functions?
Yeah, so I think other ones that are in that campaign function are, you can have strategists, digital media strategists, digital marketers. And so those are the folks that kind of fit into that realm of demand gen, that space of how are we determining, like essentially acquiring new folks to come into our funnel by us spending ad space somewhere. And again, that could be on our own channels that we own, like the company owns, or it could be outside channels that come along with that.
And those could be digital channels. Those could be physical channels.
It could be offline as well.
So to make this clear and to just really leave some breadcrumbs, so we have done our whole go-to-market launch, right? And so we're ready. So you know what your product is. You've written your differentiators. You know who's your competitive set. How is a product marketer going to start to work with a campaign or demand gen marketer?
So one, having that go-to-market plan airtight. So again, it's making sure that is on there. I think the second thing is typically when you're working with demand gen or anybody in that digital media space, you need to make sure that you're planning ahead for that. So they typically have some sort of timeline of when they have to build it in. You need to have budget. So they're going to be spending money on this. So you need to have an exact budget amount that you want to spend over a period of time, and the amount that you expect customers to convert, either become paid customers or buy your product if we're on the B2C side. So you need to have, if I'm going to spend, just for the sake of this, $50,000 over the next 3 months, I expect us to gain conversion rates of about 1,000 customers per month. And then I'm moving it from there. So you really have to be clear on your budget, how long you want this campaign to run, what exactly are you measuring? Are you specifically measuring conversions? Maybe you're, for some things, you could be measuring engagement. For some, you could just be measuring awareness. So being very clear, usage.
Adoption. It could just be strategic.
Yes.
We do want to know how many people may be repeating this in social, or how many people are resonating with the talking points that we're putting out there, especially if you're talking about repositioning. How many people are like actually having it resonate that you're more than just male, right?
Exactly. So you need to be clear on what those things are as you come to the table with your budget, with your target audience, with your timeline, and what metrics are you trying to understand and hit from there as well. And then you would work with them in kind of determining those audience types. Where do they live at? And by what I mean by where they live at is, what sites do they go on? What are some places that they like to go shopping at or get their news from? Or what locales are they in? So demographic information in terms of, where they live at, where they work at. And so they'll really work with you on honing down and fine tuning the nitty gritty of what you need.
And I would say, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I would say to be successful, this is probably, out of all of the marketers, one of your number one priority counterparts is your demand gen. Because how else are you going to get the word out there, right? You have your plan, and this is the marketer or the team of marketers that's going to help you execute on that plan. So I would say I definitely think demand gen or campaigns is probably one of the most important, because if your campaign flops and nobody knows that this product or the feature was released, then what happens, right? You've done all this planning. It could be a good feature. You could have gotten your target audience profile right, but not cutting through the clutter, not having awareness. If you have a bad launch, that's a problem.
Right.
So I would say that, kind of working with this particular marketing function is probably the most important. I would say even or close is also what I would think about is sales enablement and training team. And I think it's probably a good place, even though they're not always in the marketing function. Sometimes sales enablement goes with marketing. Sometimes it's its own team. But I do think it's a little bit fundamentally different than working with product and working with sales. We haven't talked about that. So I would say they go really hand in hand with, like, how are you going to raise awareness about your particular product launch or feature? But how are you actually going to train the teams, right? And so I think it's on the same end. If you have a great launch and you get all of these inbounds, and nobody knows how to
sales team ready.
And nobody knows how to handle the inbounds, you have a whole nother problem on your hand. So I would say thinking about sales enablement and training, and again, being flexible. Every organization is different. Sometimes that lives with the sales team. Sometimes it lives with like the L&D training team. And sometimes it lives within the marketing or product marketing function in and of itself of sales enablement. But I would say right behind campaigns people, making sure you bring along all of the sales enablement people. Do they know your talking points? What kind of customer sheets do they need? What kind of pitch decks do they need? Are they on your talking points? Do they understand your messaging and positioning? Can they parrot that back? So I think it's really important, because it's one thing if your customer gets it and resonates, but then if they get on the phone with your sales representatives or get in person and they're basically like, I don't think that feature is that important, Oh, I don't use it for that.
Right.
You know what is a good alternative? You know what I use in my life? If they're not, really on board with making sure that they're reinforcing that messaging, that positioning, what you're trying to drive people to use, it can also all fall apart. You can get the inbounds, but you're not going to see the metrics, the usage, the follow-on really flow.
And I would say just on the flip side of that, on the B2C side, because you have essentially as a product marketer, you are that person really thinking through that entire funnel, and you don't have a sales enablement team to really go through, like you are responsible for those conversions.
Yep.
I would say making sure that build out a really great marketing funnel. So as you're building that awareness and having people go down, where are those multiple touch points that you want them to have? And so that's where your email marketers come in, where your content marketers come in, where you work again alongside of your digital media team in terms of having retargeting come to play as well. And then on the back end, making sure your website team as well. So website, your web team, which are marketers as well, making sure that the website is optimized for that, both on web and mobile. Now we live in a world where it can't just be web only. It has to be web and mobile, and making that buying experience very easy for them at every single touch point before your customer converts or actually buys.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, again, whether it's content, whether it's separate email marketers, we've kind of talked about you have your launch. You really need to make sure that aligns with the brand. You really need to make sure that you're being functional in getting the word out and making sure that they're prepared to get the word out. So I think you want to make sure that this starts to flow all together. And so once you have solidified kind of the messaging around your product, why should people care? Why should they use it? Making sure that those email communications and that content, it should be lined up. And I think going back to, the go-to-market planning, I said one of the things I use is a t-shirt size, like small, medium, and large, right? I think that really determines what kind of content. Is this something rising to the the level of an email, Sometimes if it's just a feature, there's not going to necessarily be a whole email campaign or a social campaign. It might just be little pop-ups, when you go into the user experience to say, hey, look what's new. Yeah. We've all been on the receiving end of that. Oh, something's new, something's changed. Or, we've tweaked our policy. This happens a lot on social media. You sign in, we tweaked our policy. You can click here to learn more. You can click here to say yes.
Right.
So it's not something that even rises to the level of an email campaign or a social campaign. Sometimes there's just guides and aids in the actual product. But that would, I would say, be something that we would consider small, right? In medium, you might think that you definitely need some more boost. There might be an email about it. And then something large, you might also have PR, and you might have commercials, or you might have videos, and you might have multiple streams of content just beyond your email team, and I think email can function in two ways. When I often think about email or demand gen, there is going to be a team that helps you actually deploy that email. Yes. And then you have to also think about the content people who are going to be creating that email. And if you're new to marketing, the people who create and the people who deploy, unless you're a very small company, are often not the same people. So you have to loop them both in. How are you going to tell that story? But also, how are you going to execute this? And understanding the marketer's needs. How does this launch fit into all of the other launches that are going on? Because if you're at a medium or large size company, you are not the only launch happening. You are not the only email campaign. Yeah. There are constant activities going on to nurture.
That you have to balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I think is, I'm glad you brought that up, because as we were talking about, this episode is working with marketers, right? So I feel like also on marketing teams, we've had to struggle with what is the marketing calendar, right?
Oh.
So I am a product marketer. I have this launch going out, but there's a content team that has something else going out. The social media team may have something else going out. Brand team is running a major brand awareness campaign at the time. So I think even though you're probably within that same marketing organization or structure, there are still a number of marketing activities going out outside of just your own, and just trying to get alignment of when do we do what here, how many things are in the market at any given time, and how do you make that balance between when the brand campaign goes out versus when this product launches versus when this email campaign goes out. Are we hitting, even if for email campaigns, this, we're doing a brand campaign and this product launch, are we hitting the same groups? Are we hitting different groups? How many times are we talking through that? So I think talking about working with other marketers, it's like getting that visibility into as much as possible what all is going out at one time, because we may be hitting certain customer groups all at one time, or the same ones, and how do we not overwhelm them? So I think that's why it's really important to get that alignment. And again, we've worked at multiple marketing company, like organizations. I don't feel I've ever worked at a place that truly had it right to where we had everything on one page, but we've tried to like get it there, and there's at least been a central place that we can see what's going on. But that's the balance that you have to work with when you're talking about working with other marketers. You're definitely not the only
something you didn't
out.
even mention is transactional emails. And it's interesting because transactional emails often don't necessarily fall into the marketing team. But as you think about marketing calendar, and you think about touch points for your customers, something I come up against now that I'm doing, legal and policy comms, and we are in a world where there's a lot of things happening with changing of policy. And it used to be like, you do that once a year, right? But now that GDPR is launching, CCPA, we don't know how many other states, Canada has their own. Policy is changing, and understanding that your actual product launch may require a change in terms, may require a change in policy. And so even though transactional emails are often not handled outside the marketing team directly, if they're touching your customers, you still have to be aware of that frequency, that touch point, what is the target audience, and something like transactional emails touch everybody. There's no opting out of that.
That's true.
So understanding that there is a whole even series of email streams that may not be on the marketing calendar, but that may be touching your customers. And so we're constantly having a balancing act between there's a webinar that needs to go, but I might have to tell you something about policy, or I might have to tell you something about your billing, or I might have to tell you something about this. And again, in your customers' eyes, you guys are one company.
One company.
So there still needs to be a limit, both from a good customer experience, but also from your own email reputation. For those people who might not be familiar with the email side of marketing, your email reputation and your deliverability could be ruined if you're not being really cognizant of your touch points, and people start marking you as spam, or people start blocking you, and that can impact your deliverability later down the line. So it is really important to kind of understand the broader view of things that are happening.
We know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to get everybody aligned, but we think this week's product spotlight will help. Rike is a project management tool that can pull together all your marketing activities in one single platform. It has a feature that allows you to visualize each step of the go-to-market process and link dependencies. They even have an automated reporting tool that allows you to update all of your stakeholders without leaving the platform. It is no wonder why thousands of organizations are already using Rike, and we can't wait to hear what you think too. And now, back to our show.
You talked about fighting for resources. So I think that that's probably a good segue to kind of think about talking about content and creative people, right? Because those are the resources that I think you really need to bring this to life, above and beyond kind of some of the marketing ops and email people. It's going to be creative. What is that timeline? What are their, SLAs to get stuff done? How complicated is this? Is this even a standalone email or campaign? Or is this something that might get bundled with something else? Is it going to rise to that level? Can you even hit your launch date because of the priority of things that are coming out? I would say, to me, the challenge historically for creative resources has been
one of the biggest challenges. And that could be from they just never have enough creative resources to even hitting your, time to launch SLAs. Because how long is it going to take to iterate and for them to get it? You have a vision in your mind, and they are also holding a completely different point of view and perspective. They have to hold the brand in mind. And how long is it even going to take for you guys to start to shape out what does this look like? Do you have a very standardized template? Or is this part of a broader campaign where the visual identity matters in your email, and that's going to go out on social, and that's going to go out on billboards, and you have to create some kind of cohesion in your campaign? Do you need a campaign theme? What is this about? Is it going to be something very straightforward where it's like, we have a new feature XYZ? Or is this going to be something that is impacting your brand and positioning? Like, hey, we have a whole new suite of services, and I am one piece of a bigger launch, and you could be owning that series of launches, or you could be collaborating with other potential product marketers to say, hey, our customers are not going to care about these 3 things. We actually need to bubble this up into one email or one campaign.
And I'm glad you're bringing this up too, because it sounds like you're talking a lot about in-house creative, but there's also out-house creative. So this is when you're actually working with an ad agency or any other type of brand agency to also work on your creative. And so how do you manage that relationship?
Even longer lead times.
Yes, even longer lead times for sure. And sometimes they are not, because they're not, unless you have an established relationship with this agency, let's say that you used them in the past, oftentimes you have to educate them about your company, your product, this particular feature. And so you have to do a whole education with them before work even gets started, before they start working on the campaign. So I think there's also that thing of managing in-house versus out-house, like an agency that's going to help you.
You make me realize that I am incredibly privileged that I have worked with a lot of in-house creative, because that's actually not that common. But to my broader point of even talking about your customers, outsource creative, external agencies, I mean, I'm just like pausing because you are not their only client.
No.
And so you're coming up against a whole bunch of, there is a brief, there is a whole very formal process. If you kind of miss your windows, the way they do their people planning and their budget, and having a delay can mean a whole other impact, and you don't know how big of a client you are for them.
That's true.
So if somebody like me who typically works at smaller companies, you're not pushing a giant and a huge brand name out the way. Like, they could have a strategic client that makes up 60 to 90% of their revenue. And if you are a smaller book of their business, the amount of flexibility, the amount of customization that you can do can be a whole different conversation, where I'm like, I might be used to, I want flashy stuff and interactive and blah, blah, blah. And agencies like, it's much more of a template. You can pick from this menu because you are not necessarily our biggest client, and we have to save our spaces and our cycles for that.
For them. Yeah. And when they have fire drills, it's all hands on deck.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But it's about managing that relationship. I think as a product marketer, one of the things you are going to be responsible for is, to your point, create like that creative team. But there's a difference when you have an in-house creative versus an external agency working with you on that too.
Yeah. So, one of the topics that we wanted to talk about is what makes a good campaign. So what do you think? You have all of these different pieces of marketing. We know that they need to work together. There's no ideal, and we know that we should work well together, but everybody's busy and strapped for resources. And so that we don't always work very well together. So how do you go about making a good campaign? Like, what do you think about is really important?
Planning early, bringing folks into the process pretty early in that. So to my point earlier about having that model where, you bring in all of your different stakeholder marketing marketers that you're going to be working with, and bringing them in early as thought partners within that. I think some of the best campaigns that I've seen just executed on, even if timelines changed, people felt good about it because they were brought in early. They understood the vision. They knew like our metrics were very clear.
Yep.
We had very clear message and positioning on where we wanted. We were very clear and direct on it's this specific target group that we're going after and these specific locales, and we're going to run this for this period of time, and here's what we hope to accomplish, and here's how we're going to execute on, whatever metrics come in from that to improve this over time. So it was very clear on what we were trying to accomplish, who we were going after, the length of period of time, the creative came through, the messaging was clear. And I think that does work with like planning early, having that collaborative thought process as well. There's a whole lot of other things, but those are the main two
I
things
think
I'm touching
you
on.
gave some really practical and sage advice. I'm going to say something that I think is really counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what makes a good campaign is a good theme. And it doesn't even have to be an external theme, but I do think it's helpful.
Explain that. Do you mean theme in terms of a project theme that people can rally around, or just like theme around this is what we're going after, like big mission, vision?
I think it's both.
Mm-hmm.
Where I have seen success, right, is getting people excited. And that theme could be external, and you're getting your customers excited. But if you think about a good campaign that sticks out in your mind, like think about one. It wasn't themeless, even if like traditional media got milk, I'm talking about MailChimp today. It's like, we're more than mail. If you think about a good campaign, it has a theme.
Mm-hmm.
It has a good theme. It is somewhere between very catchy and something very simplistic and easy to remember.
Right.
And we are all busy. And so I think if you're going to really evangelize internally with your stakeholders, and at tech companies, we are known for these like project code names, right?
We definitely do project code names. There's so many clever little ones.
But like, why do people do that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, because it gets people excited.
Yeah.
And I remember at one of my jobs, we used to have themes for the code name. So it was just like, we will go A through Z with like animals.
Yeah.
Or it could be TV shows, right?
Or, I mean, it's similar. Like whenever Android releases a new thing, it's always dessert theme, right?
Yeah.
And when I was at Google and going through our different Android updates, we would have parties around that.
Exactly.
So the engineering team, the product team, the marketing team, whenever we had a new release, like for Kit Kat, for example, right? So we had like Kit Kats in the office and we celebrated around that. And so we had themes to go with that. So I think that's a good point.
It's not intuitive,
right,
but I think a good theme, even silly code names that they're like, we are so excited about, MVP. We are so excited about Kit Kat. We're so excited about Zoo.
Right.
I think a theme, it just creates kind of a universal language and some simplicity that people can rally around. And even if it's internally, I think it's very important to even help socialize, right? Because even having that little thing, are you talking about Kit Kat, right? Like it just helps people to just place it in their mind and figure out. So even if you just need an internal campaign, and I think as marketers, it's really important to like always market your own work and always think about your best practice. And I think about like one of the campaigns I'm running right now that people are excited about. It has a theme and it's silly. It doesn't have to have a theme. We're doing employer branding campaigns. We're trying to pull people in to apply for jobs. So it's not something that is explicit. We could just be going out with our brand, but just the fact that like I came up with a theme, we paired that creative with that theme, it just sticks out in people's mind and people go around talking about it.
And as marketers, like we're supposed to be the fun group, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be the fun creative group. So making it fun along the way, I think that's a good point. I think to add to that, another tip is just make it fun where people actually want to work with you.
Yeah.
Make it fun, make it easy,
Yeah.
make it to, have those celebratory moments where you're just like, okay, we've launched. It's
I
cupcakes
know.
and champagne time.
I think
Or,
I think marketers are known for a good launch party.
Yes, exactly. That should definitely be a skill you have to have as a product marketer, just a marketer in general. Know how to throw a good launch party.
Yeah, but I also think it helps enforce, like we were talking about these messaging and talking points, even internally, that theme, just that people can rally around, that you can see, we have chalkboards in our office. So one of the things that we do is like when we do a new launch, even if it's just simple, even if it's not a whole party, some decorated cookies and some whiteboard chalkboarding goes a long way. Balloons, it could be like a couple of $100, maybe not even, goes a really long way to just be like, oh, this is exciting, right? 2, 3, 4 words that you can put together that people can get excited about. So I think it's really important to have a good theme, and that's part of a good campaign. Yeah. I think you hit upon another piece that we should dive deep into, which is your metrics, right? So we have talked with the brand people. We have figured out our salient talking points. We figured out how to get it out in the market. We figured out if this is a multi-channel campaign. We have come up with a theme for our campaign. And in that go-to-market planning process, you definitely want metrics. But I think kind of now that we have launched the campaign, we branded, we launched, we got all of our messaging and talking points, I think we need to really talk about the numbers for the campaign and the numbers for your product, and who are the people that you partner with as we get into like the maybe potentially less fun side of marketing, but the more actual quantitative business side. How are you going to show your value side of marketing, which is really important?
I know we've talked a little bit about this, but I think as a marketer, and especially as a product marketer, you need to have that skill set to be comfortable with the data and figure out how that tells a story around your customers' usage, adoption, why people actually start to churn, why they stop using your product. And where they go, where are the different channels, the top channels that people come in from, right?
Yeah.
And so I think with this, some of the other marketers you'd be working with are that really important are your marketing analysts. Yes. And really figuring out what are the things I need to put in place? So whether that's pixels or any other tracking like mechanisms to really be able to track my customers from beginning, that first touch point I have with them, all the way through to where they convert and become our actual customers, and look at that usage rates that they have over time. And I think that's really important, of finding a good marketing analyst who's going to be able to work with you in order to figure out the information and data that you need to collect in order to tell a good story. And that being said, that goes back to the metrics that you're trying to hit in terms of why you're running a specific campaign, and what are the data sets that need to get pulled in over to make that decision. So again, if you're doing a campaign around, let's just say it's adoption, to increase adoption of a specific feature, let's get clear on that. What data levers are you pulling in order to get that information? How are you working with your analysts to get that? What information do you already have available? And how is this particular campaign going to help increase those adoption rates of a particular feature?
Yeah. And so this is interesting, and to kind of tie it back, I think that this is also a potential place where you want to definitely work with your marketing analyst. This also may be a place where you work with your customer marketing people, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're talking about two different pieces, and I always want to be cognizant of, really the new product marketers or the new to marketing people. There is the campaign, and campaigns in and of themselves are going to have metrics, right? We are going to send out that email. We are going to do a PR campaign. So your campaign in and of itself has metrics. But as product marketers, it's also important that your product, the usage, the customer has metrics. I think what makes a really good launch is you have to be savvy enough to start to figure out how do you tie the campaign, which has their own set of metrics. How many ads did you send out? How many people saw them? How many people clicked? How many people took an action? How many people purchased? That whole set of information layered on top of, there might be different audience segments that have all of those campaign metrics, is a whole set of data. That is actually very different from your customer data to say,
how many converted, and then once they became a customer, how many are logging into a platform, or how many people are going to your store, or how many people are using something, how many people are upselling or using that feature. And those are what I would consider customer metrics.
Yeah.
So I think for a good product marketer, you have to really understand that whole customer life cycle, that whole customer journey, also sometimes called a marketing funnel, where you are actually tying your campaign metrics and your usage metrics, because you want to be able to say this campaign performed well and delivered X amount of, usage, activity, new customers.
Yes.
You also want to be able to analyze and look at those customer metrics to figure out where you might need marketing to get over the hump. What did you say? Some things might actually not be using well. I'm trying to drive adoption, but I'm actually seeing, if you're trying to drive adoption, it's very important to understand the customer metrics in your baseline of data before you launch a new feature campaign. So how many people were using this before? And then we launched something new and we did a campaign around it. How many people are using it after? And understanding where people might be getting hung up or stuck in using that. And that informs the next cycle of marketing.
Right.
And whether that is either an official campaign or whether that is your customer marketer who's going to be able to dig in, or you're leveraging your sales reps or account managers to understand what's the disconnect. We thought we did everything right and people are still not using it. So do they not understand it? Do we need demo videos? Do we need other content to help supplement how people are going to integrate or use or onboard?
Yeah. And you'll figure out your use cases, and that also just gives you more layers on top of that of, these are our 3 top type of customer types, right? We have somebody who's super light touch, or we have heavy users, and we have folks who come in cyclical, right? And you're able to tell those different customer groups that will emerge between having those 2 sets of data together.
Yeah. So anything else on market research or market analysts or kind of people who will help you with your metrics and your data?
Let's see.
I think it's important to be clear.
It's very important to be clear with them on what you're trying to solve for and what data sets you can actually pull for.
Yeah, and I think to the theme that we keep saying about everybody, right? It's important to pull them in early, have a thesis, maybe about what data you want and you want to collect, because you might need to your point, tag your marketing, or you might need to set up your campaigns in a certain way to make sure that you can actually collect the data that you want.
Exactly.
If sometimes you set up the campaign before you think about the metrics, you're not always able to go back and get that tracking that you may need.
Yeah. So I think that goes into your marketing tech tools. So more tech tools that are there, and understanding what those are, what your company has available, and also understanding do we need to build something or buy something else in order to get us, allow us to collect the data that we need to have and build that as well. And working with your marketing analyst team will help along the way.
Yeah, I think it's a good place.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any real specific questions about working with marketers, because I think everybody knows that they need to do it. But we did have some really interesting stats from kind of surveying people and what they wanted to know. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that 90% of people said that their key stakeholders who are marketers, other marketers.
Yeah.
And it was really split. 90% said product is their key stakeholder, and 90% said marketing. So maybe it's a little obvious in the title of what we do. But, one of the reasons why this is a whole episode and we broke it out is because it really is that important. These are the 2 teams that you're going to be working with the most. And it is a very cross-functional role. Not only do you rely on other parts of the business, you rely on other marketers to get it done.
Yeah. And the only one that I was going to touch on too is just your PR and Marcoms team. We talked about it lightly, but I just wanted to make sure that we do talk about that, as well as folks who you'll be working with as well. And I think it goes on to what you talked about a little bit earlier. Sometimes your particular launch is not going to call for a full-on PR, like a press release or Marcoms or any other activities that may go around that it's probably going to be reserved for really heavy, big, like strategic launches.
Yes.
But it's always important to, again, bring them in early just to see how they feel about that. And sometimes something that you think might be small, there could be some reactions to it in the market or from media. And so you'll need them to draft up any reactive comms and how the industry might feel about something that goes on there. So I just wanted to, before we closed out, make sure that we touched on PR and your MarCom team.
It's so interesting. I think this is very similar to creative too, that sometimes you have in-house PR people and you have outsource, or probably I would say most people have a combination. You have some in-house folks, you have some outsourced folks. But this is a really good point that you might be needing to seed them content, especially if you have a PR team that is purely an agency and they don't sit with you. Some of the same challenges really apply. You may not be their biggest client. You may have a limited number of hours and you really have to prioritize what you need them to do. And it's also probably harder for them to proactively write or create content if they're an outsourced PR agency, mainly because they're not sitting with you every day.
Yes.
They don't, if you are struggling to know the other marketing calendar and the other marketing launches, someone who's not within your organization is going to struggle to know all of those things. And so bubbling up the content and the bigger picture and making sure they understand the salient talking points as they are an extension of your external facing team in the same way sales are, it's very important to bring them in, but to almost arm them and prep them with the same talking points so they can do what they do best, which is find the right opportunities for you, find the right outlets for you, make sure that the positioning is landing, helping you measure and listen, and even, sometimes get the feedback from reporters directly of like, how do you see this company? What is resonating? And I think it's really important in the same way we talk about campaigns to use PR to strategically help you change that positioning.
Exactly.
I think this is a really good place where, to me, I think almost having your market research team and your PR team thinking about that. If I were to create a new triangle, and we're
creating new triangles here.
If I were to create a new triangle, I would say market research and PR and product marketing should be a triangle, because market research would be really important to understanding who your competitive set is and what's out there. And your PR team could be doing a good job, especially if you're in a time of elevating or repositioning, to say, how can we start putting you in places with your ideal, competitive set versus your current competitive set?
Right.
If I'm trying to evolve my products, I might not want to be mentioned with the same competitors. I might want to be getting in different conversations because I'm new to the market someplace. And that's where I would say kind of balancing the market research between like, where are we positioned today and where do we want to go and how are we measuring that, and partnering with your PR team to actually strategically help you start to move those conversations, and then thinking about the content that you need to supply them so you can get in those ideal conversations. Exactly. Yeah. That's an amazing point. And something else I wanted to hit on kind of from our survey is, as we talk about kind of PR and content creation, we found when we surveyed 80% of product marketers are responsible for content creation.
Yes.
And a whole nother 10%, so 90% was saying, I'm at least involved in the process and I'm involved in some ways, but even if they're not owning that process. So, content, making sure that you are partnering with other marketers is obviously strongly a big key to your success.
And knowing that you're going to be doing a lot of that content creation, at least being that starting point of creating something before it gets finalized, before you bring in copywriters, other marketers to help finalize it. But you will be doing a lot of that.
And at least owning those talking points so that you can nail that positioning, even if they evolve it or make it prettier.
Right.
Awesome. I can't believe it.
This is our last episode of this season.
Last episode of our first season, but we will be back. We've had so much fun doing that, and there's so much to cover and so much content. But thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for
being our listeners. We are so excited. Next season, we will be bringing more interviews
from
other product marketers to hear a little bit more about their journeys.
Yeah, product marketers as well as sales leaders as well as product managers, and really starting to figure out how, we contextualize all of the things we talk about and really putting it into action and hearing from other different functions about how they want to work with product marketing and best practices.
Yes. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us.
That was our final season episode of Market Ready, a podcast about how companies bring products to market. I am your host, Jeanette Jordan.
And I am your host, Miyishia Slay.
And we are signing off for season 1. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
This show was produced by the Market Ready team, sound mixed and edited by Full Spectrum Productions, with original music from Damani Rhodes. Thank you again for listening, and feel free to connect with us at Market Ready Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.